We're starting to see more and more breakthroughs in AI. Now this is exciting, but you're probably wondering, will these advancements in AI impact my job? And how long can I keep my job before I'm eventually replaced by a machine? Well, OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, have published a paper on this very topic. And the results are pretty surprising. When we humans ask these large language models for an answer to a specific question we have, they instantly produce accurate responses. OpenAI studied how large language models could impact the future of work in the US, and in summary, they found that large language models like GPT could replace us in doing a lot of the tasks we do today. Almost 1 in 5 US workers are in a job where 80% of their work could be replaced. So here are the jobs most at risk. The key thing they looked at was exposure. Exposure here is saying that using a large language model like ChatGPT, would it be able to complete a task in half the time or even quicker when compared to a human, without reduction in the quality? The paper stated that people having a higher education, like having a bachelor's or even a master's, were actually more exposed to large language models. So looking here, the job of an interpreter has 76.5% exposure. So this means that 76.5% of tasks that an interpreter does could be replaced by a large language model like ChatGPT. So the higher the number for a given job, the higher the risk it could be automated. They got these numbers by asking humans and GPT-4 independently to assess tasks that are already being done at work today. Now some tasks are more easily automated than others. That's why you're seeing these different Greek alphabet letters for both humans and for GPT-4. Here Alpha is using something like ChatGPT to do a task at work. Beta is saying using a large language model like ChatGPT won't be enough to reduce the time it takes by 50%, but having access to some additional software alongside something like ChatGPT could get the task done in half the time or less. Zeta is saying alongside a large language model like ChatGPT, could these tasks be automated if they had full-blown access to these additional software? So why are jobs like proofreaders and survey researchers at such high risk of being automated? Well, it's because a lot of the tasks that actually make up these jobs are based on specific rules. These rules can now be learned by these large language models, like for example identifying spelling and grammar mistakes. Also, if there's a lot of repetition, it does present more possibilities for automation. What's also interesting is that programming is something more susceptible to being influenced by large language models. Yet despite what many people thought before this paper was published, it didn't actually make the list. Software engineers do a lot more than just writing code. They can be asked to design new user interfaces, new algorithms to solve complex problems, and even find ways to integrate new technologies. Because these sorts of activities need critical thinking as well as creativity, these activities are actually less exposed to large language models. But there is no doubt that these large language models are actually getting better at writing code. The advancements in GitHub's Copilot is a perfect example of this. So in the future, we should expect to see programmers relying more on code output from these large language models to write better code in quicker time. But what does all of this actually mean for you? If you're a writer or an interpreter, for example, should you panic? And contrary to what some of you may be thinking, the short answer is no. Just because a task could be automated doesn't necessarily mean it will be automated. Costs as well as complexity of actually implementing large language models in companies is going to be high. There's also going to be some legal and regulatory barriers for companies to consider, especially if these large language models have access to people's personal information. And the reality is, even with all these advancements in AI, some companies will actually just be so slow in implementing these technologies. So it means you won't lose your job overnight, even if in theory a lot of your job could be automated. Using large language models like GitHub's Copilot or ChatGPT, for example, will make people's lives a lot easier at work. But will automation lower wages? This one does depend on the industry you're in. Take the manufacturing industry as an example. Computer-controlled machines as well as robotics have seen many human jobs replaced by automation, and there has been a wage decline of up to 17% for people that still work in that part of the industry. But it doesn't mean all industries will see automation lower wages. Take healthcare as an example. Electronic health records as well as robotics used in surgery have not led to wages dropping, but this is because of a growing demand for the healthcare industry, as well as the need for humans to still have specialized education to complete tasks. How wages are impacted does depend to the extent to which large language models like ChatGPT actually complement or replace your work. But with all of that being said, there are still jobs which will not be impacted at all by advancements in large language models. Jobs like that of a bricklayer will still need humans to lay bricks. Bricklayers using things like ChatGPT won't actually make their work any better. And if we both take a step back, it's easy for us to get sucked in to the hype of new technology. But the reality is both new and existing players will face big challenges. A huge focus also needs to be placed on reducing political as well as cultural bias during the training of these models. Not just that, these kind of companies will need to get better at addressing adversarial attacks. These attacks are designed to deliberately get the models to output incorrect answers. The OpenAI paper mentioned how 80% of the people working in the US will have at least 10% of their work affected by large language models. So should you be scared or should you be excited? Well, I mean, if your job does have tasks that could be automated by these large language models, you should be excited, but only if you're still able to add value in ways which can't be replaced by these sort of technologies. One example would be developing trusting client relationships. Not only that, if you're able to exercise large degrees of critical thinking as well as creativity, you don't need to be afraid of any new advancements to these large language models. But if these new technologies don't complement your work but outright replace your work entirely, then you need to be aware of these developments. As I said earlier, there isn't any need to panic right now. Given the issues outlined, jobs won't be lost overnight, but it is better to be prepared for the future. And if I was you, I would seriously consider looking at other career paths. It's also worth noting that this paper is currently a working version and it's not final. The AI domain is rapidly evolving, so things are always going to be changing. But I hope this video gave you a little bit more insight into how things like GPT could impact the future of jobs. Thank you for watching.